Hello, my name is Jesica Sack, and this is Policy 581 Research Methods for Public Policy. Today I am presenting my research proposal, which is called a cost-benefit analysis on genetically modified food labeling in the United States. My research question is, what is the best genetically modified food, or GMO, labeling policy strategy for the United States? First, I would like to begin by defining exactly what a GMO is. Encyclopedia Britannica Online defines a GMO as an organism whose genome has been engineered in the laboratory in order to favor the expression of desired physiological traits or the production of desired biological products. The EU defines a GMO as an organism, with the exception of human beings, in which the genetic material has been altered in a way that does not occur naturally by mating and/or natural recombination. Did you know GMOs for agriculture were first created in the United States in 1995, and by 1999 almost 50% of all corn, cotton, and soybean crops planted in the U.S. were genetically modified. By 2002, more than 60% of processed foods consumed in the U.S. contained GM ingredients. By 2010, GM crops covered more than 3.8 million square miles of land in 29 countries worldwide. This information is important because it reveals how much GMOs are used in the United States and how much of them we are eating. Why are GMOs used? They were created to increase crop yield, resist disease and pests, reduce costs for food and drug production, enhance food quality and nutrient composition, increase food security across the globe, and some of them provide medical benefits for the world's population. Why should the U.S. consider labeling GMOs? As I'm sure most of you are aware of, there has been quite a hype in recent years about the controversy surrounding GMOs. First and foremost are human health risk controversies. The thought behind the exposure to new allergens is that GMOs are newly created and people may develop allergies to them. For example, there has been a recent hype that GMO wheat may be the cause of some cases of gluten intolerance. Secondly, horizontal gene transfer occurs when there is a movement of genetic material between unrelated species, which often happens in bacteria. In a laboratory setting, horizontal gene transfer occurs between GMO plants and gut bacteria. GMOs were introduced in the 90s, which was not that long ago. People fear that their long-term effects have not been observed yet. And then there's the right to know what we're eating. There are many people who have religious and philosophical beliefs, and they often conflict with eating GMOs, especially if genes from a forbidden food are used to create a GMO. There are many ecological concerns surrounding GMOs. One example is herbicide overuse, leading to herbicide-resistant weeds. And then finally, I'm sure that most people have their own opinion about this, but the only thing I'm going to say is that Monsanto has been criticized for being unfair to farmers, which has raised moral concerns for some. Who cares? This year has proven to show increased concern over GMO products. In January 2013, the New York Times conducted a telephone interview survey to determine the American view on GMOs. The survey included 1,052 adults across the country whose numbers were randomly selected by computer. Both landlines and cell phones were used. Each region of the country was represented in proportion to its share of all telephone numbers. And this survey found that 93% of respondents believe GMOs should be labeled. 37% of them feared health risks, 13% of them were concerned about GMO impacts on the environment. Secondly, in October 2013, Rutgers University in New Jersey conducted an online survey service that they called Knowledge Panel, which included 1,148 participants. The data reported was weighed to be naturally represented, and they found that 73% of respondents believe GMOs should be labeled. And then finally, members of the food supply chain want to know what's going on. They want to know if there's a market demand for biotech foods and if it's stable and large enough to support labeling. What are the policy options? First and foremost, there's the no labeling option. There would be no labels required. There'd be no additional cost to anyone. A second policy option is a voluntary labeling option, which is what we currently have here in the US. That would require, well, that would not require, but if companies whose products are GMO free wanted to label their products, they could, as long as they prove that their claim is true. And this way, only the consumers who value non GMO food pay increased costs. The third option is a mandatory labeling option, and that happens when companies are required to label their products by labeling schemes that are defined by the government. There are two options within the mandatory labeling option, which is contains GMOs, does not contain GMOs. This way, all consumers pay increased costs associated with the labeling. Who would be affected? Consumers, farmers and grain handlers, GMO seed manufacturers, processed food manufacturers, retailers, and regulatory agencies. What are the costs and how will they be quantified? So what are the costs of implementing GMO labeling policies? First, there's market segregation, standardization, testing, certification, and enforcement. Actual costs of market segregation, standardization, testing, certification, and enforcement are comparable to the costs in the organic industry, who also has to label and segregate and certify and test and enforce their products. So we could use the cost from, we are going to define the costs of the GMO labeling schemes to the cost of the organic scheme. Furthermore, the GMO Free Project, which is a project in the US that certifies the companies that are currently under the voluntary labeling scheme, they know how much it costs to certify their projects, certify the products. So we can use them as a source to define these costs. Public education. Successful labeling policies go hand in hand with public education. The cost of public education for new labeling policies are comparable to those of the USDA's nutritional label educational costs and those of the organic label educational costs. So we can use those two sources to figure out how much it would cost to implement a GMO labeling scheme. Increased farming costs are potential costs that stem from the idea that GMO crops are cheaper for farmers to maintain during the growing season. Since the GMOs are made to resist pesticides and herbicides and increase yields. This cost is variable from year to year and from crop to crop. Farmers, some researchers, and agricultural extension stations know the production costs for each year and are able to predict costs for the upcoming year. I plan on contacting these resources to figure out what the exact cost is of a conventional crop versus a GMO crop. And then increase price for the product to the consumer. We can use the GMO free project price point of certain products and compare them to their uncertified counterpart. And as I will explain in the next few slides, the benefit of GMO labeling will be valued through willingness to pay auctions. In these auctions, participants will bid on GMO and non-GMO potatoes, corn, tortilla chips, and beef. And for the purpose of the study, the difference in production cost for GMOs and their conventional counterparts will be calculated for only those three items, just to maintain consistency. What are the benefits? Well, first and foremost, reduction in the risks associated with GMOs that we talked about before. Like the right to know what's in your food, the morality and philosophical beliefs, and hopefully, some people hope that labeling will help the environment and ease some of the economical issues that are associated with GMOs. How will the benefits be quantified? Well, um, the benefits are harder to quantify than the costs of GMO labeling because they are non-market values. They're not something you can say, I want to buy this for $10 because it's hard to determine how much your health is worth in monetary means, for example. So I plan on using contingent valuation surveys and willingness to pay auctions to capture the true value consumers place on reducing the risks associated with GMOs and forecasting the market potential for GMO labeling. Contingent valuation surveys historically have been used to quantify non-market values like the environment. In this study, contingent valuation surveys will be sent out to randomized households and administered over the phone to randomized telephone numbers. The goal of the survey is to capture the true value customers place on reducing the risks associated with GMOs and forecast the market potential, like I just said. And the willingness to pay auctions will have the same goals as the surveys, but will provide the participants with non-hypothetical situations. Using both of these, the surveys and the auctions help us to account for any biases created by the nature of the experiments. And like I said before, trying to drive the point, the survey and auction are going to be used to place values on the benefits of implementing a labeling policy, which are going to be weighed against the cost of implementation that we just discussed. So, when all is said and done, the policy implications. When we figure out what the market demand and the willingness to pay are from the consumers of for policy for GMO labeling policy, we compare that to the cost of implementation. And if the market demand and willingness to pay is greater than the cost of implementation, then labeling is appropriate. Specifically, if the ratio of consumers concerned about GMOs to those that are indifferent is low, then we'll use voluntary labeling. And mandatory labeling should be used if the ratio of consumers concerned about GMOs to those that are indifferent is high. If market demand and willingness to pay is less than cost of implementation, then no labeling will occur. So, like I talked about before, the experiment consists of two parts. The first part is the contingent valuation survey. Recruitment. As I discussed before, it is going to be random. There will be calling of cell phones and landlines. There will be mailing to random addresses. There will be 2,000 surveys mailed and 2,000 phone calls made. The survey content. There was a meta-analysis of 25 studies that reported valuations for GMO foods by calculating willingness to pay of consumers, and that analysis found that responses varied based on socioeconomic characteristics. In particular, a participant's education, age, gender, and income significantly affected their response. Therefore, it's important to include that in the survey. So that is the first part of the survey. The next two parts will be a close-ended question and a payment card question. So I chose a close-ended question for the second part of the survey because it resembles market choice and it avoids over and underbidding, which is commonly associated with another option, which is open-ended surveying. Open-ended questions also tend to get a large amount of blank responses, which is something I wanted to avoid. So the first question will be exactly this. Consumers might have to pay additional costs to purchase items not containing genetically modified ingredients due to additional segregation, production, testing, certification, and labeling costs. Suppose you walk into a grocery store and you have the option to purchase non-genetically modified foods alongside genetically modified foods. Would you be willing to pay X premium for the following items? The value X in this question would vary from 10 cents to $3 in 10-cent increments randomly in each survey. The option don't know, as you can see, there's yes, no, don't know, allows for consumers who feel they do not know enough about GMOs to participate or undecided about the controversy surrounding GMOs. I thought I would be interested to include that because it can give you some idea to the behavior of people as the premium increases for non-GMO products. So, like I spoke about before, there's the potatoes, the tortilla chips, and the beef sirloin, all GMO free. They were chosen because there was the same meta study that I spoke about before um, showed that people have different opinions and different willingness to pay for fresh produce, processed foods, and meat products that contain GMOs. And so I thought it would be important to include all three of those items. The payment card question, this is just a second way to ask the consumers their willingness to pay for non-GMO foods. This way, we're asking in two different ways, checking for reliability. Suppose the price of GMO potatoes is $5 per 10-pound bag. The price of GMO-free potatoes will be higher than $5 but has not been determined yet. What is the most above the current price of $5 you'd be willing to pay for GMO-free 10-pound bag of potatoes? They're giving ranges from 10 cents to $3. And the same question is asked for not only the potatoes, but the tortilla chips and the beef sirloin. The willingness to pay auction recruitment, random digital dialing, random mailing. Both methods are designed to recruit 165 to 190 participants for each survey location. 3 treatments replicated 4 times at each location, 13 to 16 participants per treatment group, all over 18 years old, 5 different locations across the U.S. I chose an nth price auction. The benefits to an nth price auction is that it guarantees a truthful willingness to pay bid because the price is randomly chosen and the winner is not chosen by competitiveness of bid. Only one binding round eliminates saturation bias, which is one of the aspects of the random nth price auction. So, how does it happen? Each of K bidders simultaneously and discreetly places a bid on each item. Bids for each item are ranked in order from highest to lowest. The auctioneer picks a random number, n, ranging from 2 to the number of bidders. The auctioneer sells 1 unit of the item to each of the n minus 1 highest bidders at the nth price. Example, n equals 6. The 5 highest bidders are sold the item at the 6th highest price. Like I said before, only one of the rounds is binding in each treatment. And we have the potatoes, the beef sirloin, the corn tortilla chips. They're clearly labeled contains GMOs or does not contain GMOs and stripped of all of its original packaging to avoid brand bias. Participants are given a high incentive to participate. And there's also a pre-auction questionnaire to include that demographic information that I talked about that is very important. There are these treatments. There's the baseline. First round, all GM foods with labels. They bid on all the genetically modified foods. The second round, they bid on all the non-genetically modified food counterparts with labels. The information treatment. Participants are given neutral information about GM food with all possible assets and drawbacks in a random sequence. First round, randomized selection of GM and NGM version of foods. Second round, same 3 food products but with different label from round 1. Example, round 1 items, GM potatoes, GM beef, and GM corn. Second round, NGM potatoes, NGM beef, GM corn. And then the uninformed treatment would be the same as the information treatment, but they would not be given the actual information. Same bidding. Research challenges and limitations. Finding study locations and participants for auctions. Previous auction studies have been performed in metropolitan areas, but thus far I have not found one that has been done in multiple locations across the U.S. My thought behind having multiple auction locations was to have a representative sample of participants that could be reasonably extrapolated into the general population. Additionally, locations where the economy significantly depends on GMO crops or farming may have significantly different results than those that do not. I decided including policy implications for international trade would be very complicated and should just be included in a different study. I felt comfortable with this, especially when I learned that the EU's current laws on GMOs is a country that found that deciding if, or is, it's not a country, but it's a union that decided that implementing a labeling policy is more dependent on consumer utility than on international trade. And then finding accurate cost data. I'm a little nervous about finding accurate cost of GM crops versus NGM crops. So that way we could find how much extra it would cost the farmers to produce conventional crops if they wanted to switch over, because the USDA doesn't have, that specific data available. But like I said before, I plan on approaching extension workers, farmers, and researchers to get that information. And if that doesn't work, there's also the backup, or in addition to being able to take what USDA data is out there and trying to extrapolate it for the purpose of the study. And then I didn't ask participants why they have a certain preference over GM foods versus non-GM foods, or vice versa, because there are many studies out there doing that, and I wanted to stay focused. I believe that this study aims to find out if the consumers want labeling and if they are willing to pay for it. I didn't really want to know why they want to pay for it. And that is all. Thank you very much.